joined by Mr. Michael Kugelman, who's a renowned expert on international affairs and foreign policy. And certainly, मैं अंग्रेजी में चूँकि बात करूँगी माइकल साहब से और सारी थोड़ी चीज़ का कॉन्टेक्स्ट हासिल करने की कोशिश होगी. Michael, I'm very happy that you joined us on this rather important junction for the entire global, I'd say, arena. Firstly, obviously, the most pinning question to the US President Donald Trump after the airstrikes, which he's been hailing so far. Of course, the most pinning question still remains that when President Trump had initially said that he's going to wait for 2 weeks before he actually decides whether or not the US should become a part of this entire war between Iran and Israel. What happened? I mean, what exactly was, in your viewpoint, the urgency that he had to change his mind and do an unannounced attack or an airstrike in this fashion on Iran?
Well, first, thanks for having me, Mona. I mean, I think there are two
Pleasure,
possibilities here. One is that Trump's comment about wanting to wait for 2 weeks was a ruse, and he essentially wanted to catch Iran by surprise and make Iran think that the U.S. was going to hold off and then suddenly carry out these strikes. That's one possibility. The second possibility is that he simply changed his mind. I mean, he's known to do that. He's known to flip-flop in that sense. So there could also have been new, fresh intelligence that he was given, suggesting that the threat posed by Iran's attempts to develop a nuclear weapons capacity was more further along and more serious than he thought previously. Ultimately, we don't know, and we could only speculate now. But I think the important thing is that the U.S. has now joined the war, which I think is remarkable, given that President Trump had campaigned on a plank not to get involved in other wars, and he is someone who genuinely did not want the U.S. to get dragged into other wars, and he did not want to be in the position where he would have to make a call about whether the U.S. would get involved in another war. The fact that he has in this case is pretty significant. It could have some domestic political implications for him, but of course he has justified his decision to do this on the need to address a very serious threat that could impact U.S. interests. And of course, he has also essentially depicted this as something that is not a case of the U.S. joining a war. It's a one-off case of strikes. And he has said that the U.S. has no intention of doing anything else, though, of course, depending on how this war plays out and depending on how Iran might retaliate, we might not have seen the last of a U.S. military participation in this war.
Right, Michael, that was rather candid of you. Also, of course, since there's a stark contrast between and action when we speak about the US president at this point in time, and importantly, that decision hasn't come or hasn't been endorsed by the US Parliament, and that remains a matter of concern on, of course, a domestic viewpoint as far as the US viewpoint domestically is concerned. What consequences could that have for the US president? Because I've also spoken to certain people, of course, and they do think that, you know, this could also be consequential of a possible impeachment or anything as such. I mean, the consequences for the US president, if any, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think it's become a norm in recent years, really in recent decades, that U.S. presidents do not seek congressional authorization for military action. This has just become a norm. So I don't really see that as something that's particularly egregious in this case, even though it's just the latest case where that has happened. I can't speak to the possibilities of what could come next. It is true, I mean, in terms of domestic political implications for President Trump, as I said before, a significant amount of his base does not want the U.S. Involved in other wars. But if you look at the Congress, I think that certainly there are some on the Republican side that would not be happy with what he's done. But I think others will essentially rally behind him. So I can't speak to the possibility for scenarios such as the ones you indicate, like impeachment and so on. I think that's highly unlikely. But I think for me, the question is the impact that this U.S. military action could have on his political prospects, and especially as we get to the midterm U.S. elections in the Congress, some time from now, the impact that could have. Though ultimately it depends on what else the U.S. might do militarily. If there's nothing else that the U.S. does in this war militarily, I think the political impacts would be relatively limited. But if this war becomes an all-out regional conflict, if you have retaliatory strikes on U.S. interests in the Middle East or on U.S. bases, then I suspect there's a pretty good chance that the U.S. would re-engage militarily in the war, and that could have all types of implications as well as domestic political implications back home. But that's just speculating. We'll see what actually happens.
Right, of course, and that, of course, remains a concern because, Michael, as you know, almost everybody, including the UN Secretary General, has expressed grave concern on the matter, and of course, on all these developments. I'd also like to know, because Iran has been claiming that there hasn't been a casualty, there hasn't been any, nuclear spillage, which was pretty obvious had there been a prominent attack on their nuclear facilities, as is being claimed by the US. So, why was a claim as such made before and prior to a damage assessment? Do you think this should have been necessitated after or before the US made a victory speech or President Trump made a victory speech regarding this?
Well, I mean, as you well know, I mean, whenever you have a conflict, there's going to be a separate battle of narratives that plays out. And I think that each side wanted to try to be out front with their own narratives. And naturally, the Trump administration will say that what it did was successful. And naturally, the Iranians would say that there was no damage or what damage was minimal or whatever the case may be. We don't know. We don't know at this point the extent of what happened to these facilities that were targeted. And it may be quite some time before we do know. And I suspect that the Iranian government would not have much of an interest in acknowledging and being candid if there was indeed significant levels of damage. So we just don't know at this point. And I think we just have to acknowledge that this battle of narratives will continue to play out for quite some time.
Yes, of course, that remains a certainty, unfortunately, for as far as we can see or preempt at this point in time. Of course, another perspective and a rather blunt question to you, Michael, of course, that will be that, since we've all been talking about, and Iran has said that they do have the right to respond under the UN Charter, and they say that they're going to do it as per time and place of their own choosing. What do you preempt, or what do you suggest is going to happen next? What will be Iran's next move? And if they do retaliate at the time and place of their choosing, what will be the US counter reaction? And do you unfortunately see this war going beyond certain bounds at this point in time?
Right. So I hinted at the possibilities before in terms of potential Iranian retaliations, but we do have to keep in mind that Iran's capacity to inflict damage on U.S. interests, I think, has been constrained and will be constrained because of several factors. One, Iran, some of its key allies have been hit quite hard, and of course, Assad and Syria is now no more, so to speak. And then Iran's proxies, Hamas, of course, has been hit. Hezbollah has been hit. The Houthis signed a deal with the U.S. some time ago to stop their attacks. So I do think that the most likely thing that would happen is that Iran would try to get its proxies to essentially remobilize and try to carry out retaliatory strikes on U.S. interests, including potentially, though it's unclear if there's the capacity to do this, on countries in the region that house U.S. military bases. But I would actually argue that so many people are talking about possible Iranian military retaliations, but we also have to look at the possibility of economic retaliations, which
Correct,
I think would be
course.
much easier for the Iranians to pull off, and those could be extremely damaging to many, including Pakistan and so many of the countries in the region and beyond that depend on these critical choke points like the Strait of Hormuz. If these areas are shut down, that could have major impacts on certainly on U.S. interests and certainly the interests of all these countries that are shipping goods